Most small business owners start the year with a long to-do list and big goals, but no real plan to get there. We've been there. Today, I'm sharing how we built out a simplified version of annual planning based on EOS that actually fits our business, our team, and our lives. I'll talk about how we set goals, built accountability, and created a rhythm that keeps us moving forward without drowning in meetings. If you're ready for more clarity, fewer bottlenecks, and a plan that actually works, this episode is for you. All right, welcome back to the Unfiltered Profit podcast. Today, I am doing a solo episode. This is Seanna, and I'm excited to dive into our annual planning framework that we use and just try to make that process simpler. So I did a LinkedIn post about EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system, which is based on the book Traction by Gino Wickman. And when I did that LinkedIn post, I got a lot of responses where people were talking about how they hate it. It's too complicated. The most they ever did was read the book. And I get it. I really do. And if you read the book Traction, you know that he is talking about large companies, and we are not that. Most of our clients are not that. However, it is a really good framework if you take parts of it and apply it to your business. And so that's what I'm going to get into today is how we've kind of adapted that in our business to keep our goals moving forward so that we're actually hitting those goals along throughout the year and adjusting them where we need to, because let's be real, we shoot for the moon and we land among the stars, right? So first, I'm going to talk about the cadence of annual planning. So Caitlynn and I are both women that love a new planner, a fresh journal, and we get very excited about those types of planning things. And I personally am someone that loves January 1st. I love a fresh start. I don't know if it's the military spouse in me who gets that itch to move and set up a new house and all that kind of stuff, but I love a January 1 start. However, we are accountants, and as we're sitting here in Q4 of 2025, we are feeling the pressure of tax season being upon us again, even though as I'm recording this, we still haven't even hit the October 15th deadline. So we're going to end the 2024 tax season, have a couple of months to just get everything smoothed out, and then we start again January 1. So all that to say, end of year is not necessarily the best time of year for us to do our annual planning because we're getting ourselves geared up for tax season. And maybe this is us being moms, I don't know, or just the nature of our business. But Caitlynn and I figured out in the process of our first annual planning session that it makes the most sense for us to meet in August. So we do our annual planning in August. That's what we did this year, and that's what we're doing next year because kids are back in school. We're not having the imminent threat of any sort of tax deadline upon us, and we can kind of breathe, think strategically. And as a business owner, you know that when you are under any sort of deadline, whether it's a client project or a tax deadline like us, you can't think strategically. When work is busy, you can't get out of that and kind of give yourself a fresh perspective. So the annual planning needs to make sense with your business. And so this is me giving you permission to change up the timing, the cadence of when you do your annual planning, your quarterly planning. It doesn't have to match what we typically think of as annual planning at year end and reviewing the quarters in April, July, October, January type thing. So anyway, that's enough of that, but I just want to give you permission to change up that schedule where you need it to be changed. And so let's dive in first and talk a little bit about EOS. So I know that EOS can feel very complicated, but we pulled, like I said, the best parts of it and we used it in our annual planning. So don't get intimidated by just that word. I just want to give credit where credit is due because these are not my ideas. They're not Caitlynn's ideas. We pulled them from the book, and we're going to dive into what that planning looked like. So the very first thing that we did was sit down and look at our vision traction organizer, the VTO. That's what it's called in EOS. So we didn't invent this, but what it does have in it is your values, your mission statement. And so Caitlynn and I had gone through and created those when we merged. Well, we did it before we merged to make sure we were in alignment, but we did those at the end of last year. And so we have those set for the company. We have our values in place. And we went through and we made sure, did they still feel right for us? And they did. And so that was a very quick part of the process to just be like, yep, those sound good. Let's move forward. So after we walked through that, which if you've never done it, I highly encourage you to do it by yourself, with your team. Make sure your values are in alignment. But I'll be honest with you, we work with a lot of great strategic partners that are business coaches and consultants, and they get into that information way more than we do. So I would do you a disservice by talking too much about that aspect of annual planning. Despite being a certified coach, that is just not I like the numbers. So I'm going to stay firmly there. But if you've never sat down and pulled together a mission statement or a vision statement or your values, it is worth it, because it's not just, what I will say is that it's not just numbers based. It's not like, okay, I want to be $1 million company or $10 million company. It's like, how do I want to impact people? Do I want to impact my team? Do I want to impact customers? It's giving yourself and your team something that they can really get emotional about. And so for us, we know and we see how we change the lives of business owners through their financials. And so we can put a number on that of, we want to serve X number of business owners so that we're making such and such impact on their lives. And that is powerful. If we just said we want to have, I don't know, $2 million in revenue, be it like be a $2 million company. Well, the team is like, great. What is that worth to them? The impact is what really feels good. And honestly, that's why we show up and do what we do. All right. So then the next thing that we did in the planning phase was defining our 3-year goal and our 1-year goal for the company. So I know in EOS, they will maybe have you look at a 10-year timeline. And I told Caitlynn, and I think we both agreed on this point, was that I struggle with thinking 10 years from now. Even 5 years from now can feel very foreign, and you're not going to get me to like be nailed down on anything. That's just not how my brain works, because I get into so many different details. The number of questions that come up over it just isn't worth it to me. But what Caitlin and I do know for our 10-year plan is that we want to be building a company that is sellable. That doesn't mean we want to sell it in 10 years. We don't currently have any sort of intention of that. But there's a lot that you're doing when you're building a sellable company. You're making sure that everything doesn't rely on you and you're the bottleneck, that the second you have to step out, everything falls apart. And so that is the vision we have, is that as the owners of this company, we don't want to be the bottleneck. We don't want to be the thing that everything relies on. We want it to be able to keep operating and serve our clients and provide that impact without it all being on our shoulders. And so that's our 10-year plan. And that's as detailed as we wanted to get, because again, I don't personally see the value. Some people do. I do not. And so you can do a further out plan, but I would encourage you to at least like have in your mind, do you just want to be a solo op 10 years from now? And if so, that is great. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be sellable, keep that kind of idea in mind. And it doesn't have to be any more specific than that. Okay. And so then once we had that, we worked on our 3-year vision and our 1-year vision. And so those are very growth focused. Again, we're trying to tie back a value of like, we want to serve X number of business owners in that time period, because we are looking at the impact. But that also comes with revenue goals. And so we did set revenue goals and then looked at how that would impact team growth. So we looked at what positions we would want to add in the next year and in the next 3 years. From there, we were able to build out our 90-day rocks, is what EOS calls it. And so those are like the 90-day projects that we're working on. So you're doing that for 1 quarter, and the rocks are like the big things. And then we have a bunch of tasks underneath them that lead to that. And then those tasks are trackable from an ownership standpoint. So some of those tasks are for me to do, some of them are for Caitlynn, some of them are for other members on our team, so that we're working our way to getting those things accomplished. And I am going to give you guys a couple of examples, because I think this is all great, like pie in the sky, but let me give you an idea of what that actually looks like for us. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and I'm going to talk about the things that we identified in our 3-year plan, or like our 3-year vision and our 1-year vision. So in both of those, we went through and identified what revenue we would want to have for those years, what our profit margin was, and then any sort of things we wanted to measure. For us, that looks like our client count, the number of hours that we're working in the firm, the number of hours the employees are working, because we really care about work-life balance for our team. And so we don't want to be a traditional accounting firm where our team is working 60-hour weeks or anything crazy during tax season. So that's a big metric that we track internally. Doesn't mean that that's one for everybody, but it matters a lot to us. And then we have some goals around how many podcast episodes we have, how many tax clients we have, and what our mix of revenue looks like from tax planning, our monthly recurring services, that type of thing. And so we went through that for both the 3-year and the 1-year vision for the company. And then in looking at the 90-day rocks, I'm going to look through and I'll give you a couple of ideas. So we have some processes that we're trying to get really cleaned up, especially here in Q4 before we roll into tax season. So a lot of our rocks were based around that. We want client communication to be on point for tax season, so our clients are never questioning where their tax return stands or anything about that process. We would like to over communicate as much as possible. And so we're building in systems and processes now so that our clients get that experience come January. So we are focusing on that and some of our marketing processes, building out a new CRM, lots of fun tech things. So just to give you an idea of kind of what that looks like for us. So it's not, again, just pie in the sky kind of idea. Like, great, it sounds like a book, Shauna. I don't have any idea how to implement that at all. All right, so that was some of the pre-work that Caitlynn and I did before we met with a strategic partner of ours, Robin Raymond, who is a coach to women founders who are scaling their businesses to and through 8 figures of revenue. And so she was wonderful and sat down with us for a few hours and helped us talk about accountability within our company. Caitlynn and I merged this year in 2025. It was August. And we were kind of in the middle of letting the dust settle from tax season, figuring out how we smooth operations out so that, again, tax season in 2026 feels much smoother. Not that there was anything incredibly wrong, but we're always trying to grow and improve. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about like a 1-year recap on the merger and all that fun stuff. But we sat down with Robin and she helped us talk about accountability within the company. And so what we did in that process was build out an accountability chart, which is similar to an org chart, but not quite the same. So we went through the different areas of our organization, our marketing and sales function, our operations function, and then our capital function, which think of capital as both all your assets, so your people assets and your monetary assets. So we walked through those functions of the business and we laid out all the different processes in those functions and gave ownership to each of those processes. And so the ownership doesn't mean that that person is responsible for doing all of the things, but that is the person who is overseeing the process and kind of like the buck stops with them. So like this podcast process, it's part of our marketing funnel and it is a process that has to have oversight as all the assets are getting created and every episode's getting launched. Caitlynn is the one that oversees the podcast process because she's the one checking in with everyone. However, we have several wonderful team members that make all of this happen. Caitlynn and I show up and record, and then we hand it all off, and they are the ones truly making the magic happen behind the scenes. But Caitlynn is the one overseeing that process. And so we went through and identified that for each of those areas in our business. And then we sat back and we said, okay, what do we want this accountability to look like 1 year from now and 3 years from now? Because the reality is that We are a stage 2 business. So we are not in the startup phase of business. We are in the scaling phase. And there's still a lot that sits on both mine and Caitlynn's shoulders. And we don't want it to be that way forever. We want to make sure that we are operating in our zone of genius and we are putting other people into spots where they have the zone of genius that we don't have and they're taking over those tasks. So we created that forward looking document so that we can figure out, all right, in 1 year, we want accountability for these things to be handed off to these other people, these other positions. Some of those are positions we have yet to hire. And some of those are team members that we currently have. And we just have to work on more SOPs and just bringing them along in the process to be able to hand off that responsibility. At the end of the day, Caitlynn and I will continue to have oversight over like the full sales and marketing area of our business, but we don't have to necessarily have the accountability of the podcast process. And then eventually, as we scale, we might have someone that's like the CMO, the chief marketing officer, who is over the whole sales and marketing side of the business. That's not anytime soon, but there are layers of where we can add people in and remove some of the accountability off of our shoulders and put it on other people's. And I think that this process was probably one of the most helpful things that we did, probably because we just needed to do it in the first place. Like, it's different when you're one owner operator, but as soon as you add a business partner, you need to sit down and have some like, you do this, I do that. And Caitlynn and I had done that in our partnership discussions back at the end of last year, at the end of 2024. However, we didn't sit down and do it in this structured way. Like, we knew what each other's strengths were, and we had kind of been already operating in those places, but we still needed to have this final, like, okay, Caitlynn, you're over the podcast. Seanna, you're over marketing in general, some of that type of breakdown. So it was very, very helpful for us. And again, it helped us to paint that picture of what roles do we want to hire in the next year and who within our organization currently do we want to elevate into positions that have that accountability and that kind of managerial role. So then the last piece that we did in our annual planning was just set up our new rhythm for reviewing everything and just touching base. So what we decided, as to not inundate ourselves with a million meetings or anything like that, is we have 3 different types of meetings, like that type of cadence. So we have a weekly level 10 meeting is what EOS calls it. We have quarterly strategy resets, and then we have our annual strategy session, which we do in person. So as you've picked up, if you've listened to this podcast for a little while, Caitlynn and I do not live in the same state. I'm in Florida. She's in Nebraska, and everything we do is virtual except for the annual retreat. So I'm going to talk a little bit through those. First, the weekly level 10 meeting. So EOS has a breakdown of exactly what the structure of this meeting looks like. We loosely follow that. I will say that as we went through and did our annual planning, we did set up metrics for the company that we track. We keep kind of adjusting those on a monthly basis because most of the metrics we're tracking monthly, weekly. There are certain things we want to see in this growth phase. So we're tracking like the type of consults we're doing, the types of proposals we're sending out, the conversion of those, monthly revenue, number of clients. And then we've got some KPIs, some key performance indicators around team. And so we want to know, did we have any staff turnover this month? That's just like a 0 or a 1. And did we have any kind of collisions, we'll call them, of like just difficult pain points that came to the surface in the month? And so that one's some of that one is a little bit hard for us to categorize because you're like, I don't know, was it an easy month or was it a hard month? So we're still working on that. There's probably some KPIs we're going to continue to adjust in there, but we're trying not to overly track things. I think you can make metrics way too complicated, and I am known for probably like, oh, well, we should track every single like lead source. And yes, all of that is important. But as you're just trying to get into the process of doing annual planning and doing the review, like keep it simple, stupid. I say stupid to myself. So I had built out a spreadsheet with KPIs in it, and then I had to go and delete like half of them because the reality was I wasn't going to track those. And most of them did not matter to us. Like we do not enjoy Instagram marketing. I don't care how many Instagram followers we have. I have yet to have a lead from Instagram. So I don't need to see that every month, and I don't need to waste time pulling that data. So that's just an example of like, make sure you're pulling things that matter. But so kind of within that weekly level 10 meeting, we are looking at our KPIs if we've adjusted them. So if it's like the beginning of the month and we've pulled those, we talk through those. We're talking about any issues that have come up in the past week. And then we're looking and seeing if we're on target with our rocks for the quarter. So it's pretty simple. We were already having a weekly meeting anyway, and this just kind of gave us a cadence of what to talk about during that time, which was helpful. You don't have to follow that script or anything like that. And then we're doing quarterly strategy resets. So obviously, this is much shorter than our annual planning because we're just going through setting new 90-day rocks, looking at are we on track for our 1-year goals? Do anything need to shift in that process? So that can be done in like a couple of hours versus we spent 2 days on our first annual retreat going through that stuff. And then the annual retreat, again, 2 days in person. We build some fun into it, brand photo shoot, all that kind of fun stuff. But that was much more intensive. And we went and really did a good look at what has occurred in the past year, or for this first one, it was like the past 8 months, and decided what we liked, what we didn't like, what needed to pivot. So that was a very helpful thing to do. But again, it doesn't have to happen at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, if that doesn't work in your schedule. So I'm going to wrap this up since this has just been a monologue, which throws me back to the days where I had a podcast when I first started Cultivated Strategy, and I was focusing more on business coaching. So that is a blast from the past. But I just want to remind you that you don't need some sort of super intensive framework in order to start business planning. Think about what hasn't worked, what is working, figure out how to set those goals, figure out a meeting cadence that makes sense for you. I wanted to share ours because, again, I got a lot of feedback when I did that LinkedIn post about like, oh, the most you need to do with EOS is read that book and then there's nothing left to do with it kind of thing. I do think there's a lot of good that comes from it, but just remember where you're at in business versus a Fortune 500. But thanks for joining me today. If you're feeling like your growth is messy and you're juggling way too many hats, try this simplified EOS version and make it yours. And as always, thanks for listening. See you next time. Tax season doesn't have to feel like a pop quiz you forgot to study for. Join us for a free webinar on November 6th, where we'll walk you through what business owners actually need to do to get prepped without the panic, the paper piles, or the endless Google searches. We'll cover what your accountant really wants from you, how to avoid surprise tax bills, and simple steps you can take now to save money later. If you're a service-based business owner who's tired of winging it every April, this one's for you. It's free, it's practical, and we promise to keep the jargon to a minimum. Register at the link in the show notes, and let's make this tax season your smoothest one yet.